Hello, everybody. Welcome. I can see there's lots of people starting to join from all over the world to our webinar today. So thank you so much for taking the time and coming to join us today for this session. So today we're going to be talking about parasport against stigma and exploring the power of the games to challenge discrimination. So obviously exceptionally timely with the Paralympics set to begin next week, which I know we're all really excited and looking forward to. So for today's session, we're going to be exploring a little bit more into part of the 80-20-30 programme. So the 80-20-30 programme tests what works to improve access to life-changing assistive technology for all. And so far through this wider programme, which is funded by UK Aid and led by the Global Disability Innovation Hub, we've reached over 37 million people globally across 61 countries. And it's really about looking at driving a lifetime of potential. So the focus of the programme is around assistive technology, but it actually amplifies out much wider. So really looking into the cultural elements that feed into the importance of securing access to assistive technology and the use of and the adaptation of the assistive technologies. So this session today, we're going to be looking at one particular area of the programme, which is our Parasport Against Stigma programme. And that sits in our cluster 1, which is our include cluster of the 80-20-30 programme, which is really looking at creating deep community leadership and engagement. And just to give a bit of a wider picture of some of the other activities across the programme, we also do some work around Inquire, which is around generating new evidence and insights. Incubate, which is around testing and developing new tech-inspired solutions. Investing, which is really looking at bringing effective solutions to market. And integrating, which is about strengthening systems to make inclusion a reality. So I guess that's just a broader picture of the wider 80-20-30 programme, as I said, funded by UK Aid and led by the Global Disability Innovation Hub. But for this session today, we're really focusing on the Parasport Against Stigma area of work, which has been taking place since 2020. And I shall hand across now to Jessica, who will be able to explain a little bit more about some of the partners and some of the learnings and reflections we've had since the start of this programme.
Thank you very much, Louise, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Fantastic to see you all here today and to have this conversation a week out now from the beginning of the Paralympic Games in Paris. So very exciting to be thinking about and sharing some of the research and activity that has been going on. So my name's Dr. Jessica Noski-Turner, and I'm a senior lecturer at Loughborough University's London campus, which is in the Olympic Park. And we've been fortunate to be one of the project partners on the Parasport Against Stigma project, the first phase, which was running from 2020 to 2024, and we're now in the second phase, 2024 to 2026. This was one of the 80-20-30 projects, as Louise has just explained, and we've been partnering very closely with the International Paralympic Committee and through the International Paralympic Committee with 3 national Paralympic committees, the National Paralympic Committee in Ghana, Zambia and Malawi, and probably with a very strong collaboration with Malawi, as you'll see coming through in the presentations today. And also, very importantly, with the University of Malawi. So that partnership has been really important for our research and our activity. So next slide. So today, what we have planned is a discussion with some panelists and people who've been really key to the project so far, and also with the next stages as we look ahead to the Paris Games, and also perhaps even further into the future to LA. So I'll give a very short introduction to the project that is Parasport Against Stigma, what we wanted to find out, what we have found out, and some of the research and other outputs that have been produced so far. And then we have 2 panels. First, we'll talk about kind of our idea of building an ecosystem around parasport and the importance of that. So we'll look at 3 different perspectives on that ecosystem. And then we have a panel on the digital campaign for Paris. So if I move to the next slide, I'll just begin with a little bit of where we started and what we tried to explore and achieve with this project. So probably many of you are aware of the Paralympics. I don't know what your thoughts and feelings about the Paralympics are, but certainly for us in the UK, the London 2012 Games was a real landmark in helping us to see how impactful coverage of the Paralympics could be, how the Paralympics could be a real hope for new conversations around disability and new representations of disability. So as part of I guess a legacy project, or thinking about how that those learnings from that experience of London 2012 could be expanded, the Parasport Against Stigma began to ask questions around how the Paralympics can shift disability stigma in sub-Saharan African spaces. And this was on the back of an opportunity, or through the Parasport Against Stigma project, there was an opportunity to broadcast the Paralympic Games from Tokyo to sub-Saharan African countries on free-to-air television for the very first time. But I think everyone in the project was aware that we can't just take the model that has worked in the UK and in other countries and just kind of transpose that into a context like sub-Saharan Africa. There would be lots that we need to learn, lots that we need to rethink, and lots of new partners that we would need to engage for that learning. And I think also another aspect of this is that there's an underrepresentation of para-athletes representing nations in sub-Saharan Africa. There's an uneven playing field in terms of the number of athletes that are able to participate at that elite level, and also the opportunities at a grassroots level. So this was our question: how can Paralympics shift disability stigma in sub-Saharan African spaces? Moving on to the next slide, please. So that kind of guided our objective. How can Paralympics be harnessed to shift disability stigma in sub-Saharan African countries? And in particular, as part of the AT 2030 project, we understood stigma as having, as being one of the multitude of barriers to accessing assistive technology and other rights and entitlements for people with disabilities. We used action research and qualitative methods to explore how this could happen. So action research enables us to take action, reflect on that action, and think about what we might do next in cycles of practice and in collaboration. And then we had these three areas of community engagement, broadcast, and athlete development that we were seeking to build in a complementary kind of a way. So if we move to the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these three areas and why they were important. So I've already talked about the fact that we had this opportunity to broadcast to countries in sub-Saharan Africa for the first time on free-to-air television. So that involved reaching out and making partnerships with some of the national broadcasters. And looking at how the production of that was being managed and the decisions that were being managed. So looking at the content itself and on all of the relationships and on the infrastructures that were being lent on for that broadcast to take place. And there was lots of learning that needed to take place around that. And it's probably fair to say that yeah, there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of things that didn't go quite to plan the first time around, and a lot that we were able to suggest through the research that could be done differently into the future. In addition to that, you know, it's not just about putting content on televisions and expecting that everyone's going to watch and everyone's going to understand, especially in contexts where this might be the first time that people are having any opportunity to see parasport on television. So building awareness, building interest, building engagement, connecting with partners who are able to link into communities and make this content relevant, to make it meaningful, to be able to link with local athletes, to be able to have a go at doing some parasport at the community level. So a lot of work around community engagement. And then also, you know, as I've said, there's an underrepresentation of para-athletes from many of these sub-Saharan African countries. So looking at developing coaches, developing athletes, developing facilities, So looking at the development of sport and opportunities for sport from grassroots through to elite level. What are the policies in place? What are the capacities? And how do you go about starting to build sport so that we have something to talk about when we're broadcasting and when we're engaging with communities? Next slide, please. So we learned a lot, and this slide probably doesn't do justice to everything that we learned, but here are some key insights that we were able to gain from the research. So parasport is really valuable as a hook, as a platform, and partly that's because, you know, the stories that get told, the stories that we get engaged with, the experiences, it's an emotive, a very engaging encounter, and that emotive quality of Paralympic sport provides a really good counter narrative to disability stigma, which can often also be quite an emotional response. So they're working very well to be able to address something that is very complex and very deep-seated. Linked with that, localizing Paralympic sport coverage and narratives was absolutely critical. So I remember some of the responses when we did some of the screenings was that, you know, isn't this just sport happening for rich people in faraway countries? No, it's not. It's happening here. There's parasport happening at local levels. And it's an opportunity for people in Malawi and in Ghana to be able to get involved. But making sure that there are local journalists who know how to cover this, who are interested to cover it, who are using the right language, who are connecting with people, with local athletes to tell those stories, who are attending local sports days, and to be generating those stories and making a very global, predominantly global North sport meaningful in local context was really important. Engaging in schools was also really important, and we'll talk more about that on the panel. But engaging through schools was really a ticket to reaching out into communities and into those infrastructures where young people are hopefully having a first taste of sport, of inclusive sport, and as a vehicle for talking about inclusive education. Parasport competitions being really important for that pipeline, for the pathway, and for engagement across different sectors for disability inclusion. And of course, for us, it was always very important to be thinking about how this functions with assistive technology, you know, especially if you're looking at very expensive assistive technology that's most used in sport. What does that mean when the assistive technology on the ground looks very different? So we took a very wide view of looking at the relationship between these conversations about parasport, advocacy about rights and access to parasport, to assistive technology, and also mindsets around how important it is to be advocating for the people in communities for access to that assistive technology. So those conversations around parasport leading to an opening of understanding of what's possible and thinking about what kinds of advocacy that communities need to do in order for some of those access and rights to be met. Next slide, please. So we have produced quite a number of academic publications, and there are more that are in progress, as well as, and those are available open access as well as via these journals. We also have produced a number of influencing papers in strategic outlets and produced some case studies. So hopefully we can be providing links to those throughout. And we also have a number of other outputs. So next slide, please. Also a few what we call innovative approaches or innovative tools around our innovative approaches. So we put together 5 quick wins to help inform broadcasting for the second time around, including learning from an experience of having local commentators in Malawi to do their own commentary on over the top of the existing generic feed that came through in English, and just the value that that added to be able to use local jokes and idioms and local media personalities, but also looking at the technical aspects of the feed and access, and other kinds of quick wins, we thought, for being able to improve the relevance and meaningful engagement in the broadcast. There's also a Making Noise toolkit, and we'll talk more about that, I think, also in the panel discussion. So taking this idea of making noise, of using the opportunity to get attention, to use it for the advocacy and rights demands that are going on, hooking in all those conversations and getting more attention, getting more discussion through the media and through other kinds of community communication spaces. There's also been national para games pilots at national school games, and that has been an important bridge between the different levels of other competitions that were available. There's been a lot of work taking place to localize I'm Possible, and that making sure that teachers have the best resources and at their fingertips that makes sense in the local environment. And finally, a 5Cs framework and other kinds of guides for developing parasport. So looking at coaching, looking at classification, looking at communication. I might struggle to remember all of the 5, but looking very comprehensively at the full spectrum of needs for developing sport. So those are just a flavour of some of the key outputs, key practical outputs from this project. Next slide, please. And so to try and distill down our recommendations coming out of the project, so the research indicates that parasport can contribute to stigma reduction and social change outcomes in sub-Saharan African contexts like Malawi. And the evidence suggests that for approaches to be meaningful and to have sustained impact, they should include localized approaches, increased collaboration, and building an ecosystem. So building an ecosystem, this brings me very nicely, this is a nice segue into the next part of our discussion today. Next slide, please. Which is the panel discussion around this ecosystem in this concept of building an ecosystem around parasport in Malawi. So I'm first going to come to Samuel Nkoma. Are you on the call, Samuel? If you could unmute yourself. If we're still waiting, perhaps for Samuel, he might have internet issues. So in that case, I could come to Mufananji Magalasi. Professor Mufananji Magalasi, are you on the call? Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. So great to have you with us here today. So Mufu, I know you were involved in that early stage when we're all dealing with COVID for one thing during the Tokyo Paralympics, but tell us a bit about some of the community engagement activities you did, some of the experiments that your team led to work with this first opportunity of broadcasting of the Paralympics into Sub-Saharan Africa.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jessica. In terms of the grounding experiment, let me try to organize my my response in this way. Let's look at the call. What was the call? The call was that in terms of the Paralympic Games, Tokyo 2020, there was going to be a TV broadcast to sub-Saharan countries, including Malawi. And out of that, the intention was to try to see how the games would be like some kind of a mitigator for stigma, But apart from that, the intention was also to try to see if we can popularize sports for people with disabilities. But apart from that, awareness and an enhancement of use of assistive technology. And that is both in terms of general life, but also in sports. We were going with the vision of bringing across or taking across the idea of disability is not inability. And we're trying to put that on the agenda. And lastly, we went on to collect data on the processes of the community engagement, that is in terms of the achievements and challenges. What we did, because of low TV ownership and accessibility in Malawi, which is at 12%, we went on to do community engagement, especially in rural communities. We took the localized highlights that came from TVMS through Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, with a commentary in Chichewa, and we took that as mobile screening into the rural communities. But apart from that, we also used theater for development. And in here, what was happening, there was the viewing of the highlights, and theater for development is the type of theater where it's not only performing for entertainment, but the performance gets stopped to engage viewers, to engage people who are in these communities who have come to engage on issues that this is raising. But apart from that, said we collected data. On processes of community engagement. If I might continue, what lessons did we learn out of that? We achieved not only viewing, but engaged communities on the above issues. For example, in terms of assistive technology, for example, the communities were, when they watched the games and they looked at how the athletes at the para games were using these assistive technologies, there were questions that they raised about affordability, for example. As Malawians, are you sure Dr. Magasi will be able to afford this? This is very, very expensive. This is for rich countries, essentially. So issues like those came out very, very strongly. But apart from that, through the community engagement, we started off on a low note in terms of perceptions. Can people with disabilities take part in sports? Some of the people were seeing this for the first time. But by the time we finished the viewing and the time we finished community in theater for development, people actually said, oh, who is this Malawi Paralympic Committee? Who is in charge? Can we get in contact? Because I would want my child who is on a wheelchair to actually take part in some of these sports. So we were able to achieve quite a lot. And then in terms of lessons out of that, we did not only achieve the viewing, but engaged the communities. And out of that, we created a making noise toolkit, I think, which Jessica has referred to. The use of accessible communication mediums to communities, I think that's the biggest lesson that we learned out of it. Because when we make this information available through mediums that people in Malawi, people in rural communities, for example, are able to access, we were able to achieve quite a lot. But apart from that, we engaged disability stakeholding networks with the activities. You know, Jessica has referred to this as the disability ecosystem, for example. You know, we were able to engage with the toolkit, this ecosystem made up of different publics in the disability ecosystem, whether it is organizations dealing with people with disabilities, but apart from that, maybe the media, but even general society, and some organizations with their networks. For Paris 2024, we brought together a consortium of stakeholders, as I said, with the ecosystem, including OPDs, media, and interpersonal communication practitioners. And we went on a big campaign from 1st July. We were on radio, we were on TV, we took theater for development in different areas, we were in newspapers, and we achieved quite a lot. I think in our estimate, the interim report indicates that we reached up to about 3 million people this time, around that, and that's a conservative figure. And with this thing on Paris 2024, we challenged government through the campaign, and government came on board. Last time when athletes were going to the Paralympics, there was only one ministry that came to support the Paralympians. This time, 3 ministries that were involved, including the Ministry of Sports, Ministry of Gender and Disability, Ministry of Education. They all came, ministers came and came to the Bingu Stadium for a press conference, for a send-off of the athletes, and that was, I think, on the 20th, just on Monday. So if you ask me in terms of the community engagement, this is what we did, and we learned quite a lot of lessons out of it, creating a toolkit, which we finally used for the Paris 2024, and somehow, for Malawi at least, we have been able to achieve quite a lot. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you very much. Such a rich kind of picture that you're painting there of some of the activities that have taken place and some of the impacts. I'm now going to invite Simon Munde. Simon, I hope you can unmute yourself and join the conversation. Simon is the director of FEDOMA, but Simon, I can see your microphone is off, so I will hand to you to introduce yourself and FEDOMA, and tell us a little bit about how FEDOMA became involved in collaborating with the Malawi Paralympic Committee and others involved in the Parasport Against Stigma project.
Thank you, Jessica. I am Simon Munde. I am the executive director of FEDOMA. FEDOMA is an umbrella body of organizations of persons with disabilities. In full is Federation of Disability Organizations in Malawi, established in 1999, and our mission is to unify, coordinate, and strengthen the efforts and advocacy work of our affiliate members for the well-being of persons with disabilities. And our vision is an inclusive, barrier-free society in which persons with disabilities maximize their potential. And as already said, being an umbrella body, it means that we have organizations of persons with disabilities under FEDOMA. And most of these existing at national level with some district level presence. And at the same time, as FEDOMA, we also exist at district level through the establishment of our district structures called District Disability Forum. And we're currently in almost all the districts apart from the Likoma Island. We hope to establish that structure within this year or the beginning of next year. And we also are piloting the establishment of the community level structures called Area Disability Forum. And in our existence, we've been working with Malawi Paralympics Committee, more especially through this initiative. as we were preparing for the Region 5 Games, which took place in Malawi. One thing that was so central was to make sure that we mobilize athletes with disabilities, so that we really must come out as the hosts. And that was done. And in addition to that, through our work with the University of Malawi, Malawi Paralympics Committee, and the likes of Jessica, we also mobilized members of the press to make sure that they're able to cover the issues to do with para sports. Sometimes it's been quite disappointing previously that what you see is that the other athletes without disabilities, they would participate in different regional or international sporting tournaments, and they do not even perform. But still more the media will cover that heavily. And they see an athlete with a disability would attend, would participate in particular tournaments. They have achieved something, and you see quite some dead silence on issues of coverage of that particular achievement that has been achieved by an athlete with a disability. But with the mobilization and the involvement of these media personnel in this initiative, we've seen that it has taken a different turn altogether. That we've seen lots of coverage of Paralympics or para sports, to the extent that some of our athletes are becoming now more and more celebrities, I should say, within our context. And at the same time, we are talking of issues of fighting against stigma and discrimination in situations that you find those athletes that have not disability not doing as proud, and we see an athlete with a disability who registers an achievement and raises the Malawian flag high up. It has also been quite a good way of showing to the nation the abilities that persons with disabilities have. And to us, these are some of the things that we are actually celebrating. And we're seeing that the numbers of the athletes with disabilities are even increasing. Just recently, we had an engagement with the Parliamentary Committee on Social and Community Affairs on issues of inclusive disaster risk reduction and climate change. And deliberately, we had gone with us to meet this Parliamentary Committee, one of the tennis players with the disability. And, there was quite a lot of excitement from the parliamentarians seeing this girl. I've forgotten the name, but she's Chipanya. And it was quite exciting to the parliamentarians. And they promised to even advance that agenda of even inclusion of persons with disabilities in sports. It is important. it is important to take this even to the communities, to more and more schools, more especially understanding how it's working with the elimination of the stigma and discrimination. At the same time, even supporting the functionality, the rehabilitative processes of persons with disabilities. So we feel these issues of sports amongst children with disabilities, young people with disabilities are important quite a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. Really innovative connections being made there, and you've given some really great examples, and also a really great segue to Samuel, who I believe is now on the call. Samuel, if you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Jessie.
Good afternoon. Great to see you joining. So I wanted to just this segue into schools. This is what we're really keen to hear from you about. So you've been involved in the schools initiatives, which is called I'm Possible, the package that's been developed by the International Paralympic Committee, and bringing that into schools in Malawi. So tell us about what a difference that has made, and what's the impact of that been on generating support and building support around parasport in Malawi.
All right, thank you very much for that question. So we began from a place whereby very few people knew about disability sports, let alone parasports. That's where we began from. Now, when Parasports Against Stigma, the PSAS program rolled out, what happened was we first engaged with the Ministry of Education. And with that, the Ministry of Sports and Culture was also brought in. We went out into the schools, and that's the point at which we started to feel the impact, because we were engaging with teachers who were dealing with children from a very early age. But dealing with children with disabilities meant that many of those children now had to bring in their parents who attended many of our trainings. Having had done that, we were also able to engage with the community. Now, the immediate impact was, at the same time, the Malawi Paralympic Committee was trying to set up structures in the regions and in the districts. And the first people to get involved were the teachers. They became members of the district and regional committees. So now we had people on the ground who are going to promote and who are going to inform and who are going to educate. With that as well, because now we're also in the districts, we're in the regions, we had regional sports officers who got involved, and they put in place a directive that whenever schools are going to have competitions, sorry, for lack of a better word, for the normal sports, they were also supposed to engage in parasports. So that's what we're seeing now. There is no school that is going to set up a competition without having para-athletes involved in there. The other impact that we felt is, for a long time, we struggled to find para-athletes whenever we wanted to have a competition of sorts. But now, because we have structures on the ground and people know that people with disabilities can do sports, we're not struggling anymore. We have people we can always go to, and there are a lot more people joining. It's not a new thing anymore. If I can share a personal experience, I would be on the road and parents know me, teachers know me, and they want me to bring in their children. They want me to tell them about how they can get involved. So the impact is huge. And really, we must attribute much of this to the PSAS project. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to go into the schools, into the communities, because those are the building blocks or the foundations of the whole program.
Thank you so much, Samuel. And I'm sure there's so much that we could cover. Hopefully we have some time for questions, but really great to have that sense of how these structures within the schools has really complemented and helped to be the foundation for the committees and all the competitions. It's been so critical. I'm going to move on now to the second panel, which is about the digital campaign. This is most important as we look towards the Paralympic Games that are just about to start. So Sheila, I'm going to come to you first, if you can unmute yourself. Tell us a little bit about this digital campaign. What is it that you're trying to do, and what are you hoping to learn?
Thank you very much, Jess. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheila. I've been running with the Parasport Against Stigma as the project consultant on ground. So just a brief on the digital campaign, and just to give it context, is that from the learnings of the London 2012 Games, whereby we saw the likes of Channel 4 have a better visual representation of persons with disability and especially para-athletes. And they were able to do this in different ways. I mean, we had para-athletes come in as sports commentators, training on sports commentating. I think the biggest learning from London was that if there is a different visual representation of persons with disability and parasports in general, it is a big contributor to perception change and how people engage with disability in general as a discourse, let alone disability sport. So just a brief on the digital campaign. This was back to the point that you said, how do we move from awareness to engagement to now building an interest? And we've seen the power that the digital space has. And the idea was, is there a way that we can amplify the messaging and put better representation of persons with disability on these platforms? Well, this process started with sort of like a focus group discussion, whereby we brought in different industries together. So we're talking disability advocacy groups, disability innovation space, the advertising space, broadcast, influencers, para-athletes, and personalities from film and development. And it was more so just to understand, how do we put out a messaging that is contextualized to the reality of the African space, as much as digital is a very global thing. But like we said, the contextualization of it was necessary. And this is more so to drive back to the main point, which was visual representation. And we saw this work, I mean, in Malawi, because from the coverage of the para school games that were happening in Malawi, Malawi Paralympic Committee was able to secure their first commercial partner, because out of the viewership of what was going on. So this visibility felt was necessary. So in the lead up to Paris, we're trying to test what is social impact through visual ads, in a sense of, I'll take it from a technical basis. From a technical basis, one of the feedback we got from focus group discussion is sometimes people engage with digital content, not because they actively went out to look for it, but it found its way into the feed. And so we're trying to look on a very technical basis, how do we take content that is disability sport and put it on the timeline of people to build that audience? And also, how do we take the content that is disability sports and push it into the frequency of what people are viewing, enough for them to want to engage further with it? Yeah. So this is ideally being done through what is an ad campaign, just running it on a 1 minute, 10-second, because we find that digital platform sometimes has very Insta type of engagement, but very powerful emotive message that is the alternative. So one alternative of what we see, I say the alternative because one thing that came out of the focus group discussion is people sometimes shy away to engage with the whole discourse of disability, because in general, there's been a pity narrative and a charity narrative that is almost hooked to it. And the question was, how do we change this? So it was the messaging, how do you make it more emotive and not a pity story, and just visually engaging enough to get people on board. I have to make one thing clear. We're looking at awareness first for the African space and not education or advocacy, because you cannot run advocacy for something that people don't know in the first place. And so at a very preliminary stage, we just want people to engage with it visually. And out of that, do like a social listening and to be able to really extract the data to know what do people want to see? How can we suit content to a wider audience? What are people saying about it? What is the reason behind the stigma? How do we tune visual representation of persons with disability to like target this issue? So in a nutshell, that is the big idea behind the digital campaign.
Thanks very much, Sheila. And hopefully we have a minute or two to be able, minute and 10 seconds to be able to look at the video at the end. But I'll now come to Stanley Matoya, who is joining us from the African Union Sports Council for Region 5. Stanley, great to have you here. So tell us about your interest in collaborating with all of this work at the Region 5 level. Why is it important from your perspective, and when you look towards the future in terms of the collaboration that you've been involved in, where do you see it going?
Yeah, a very good afternoon to you, wherever you are. Some of you, maybe it's morning or evening. I know of your time differences, but thank you, Jessica, for Dr. Jessica, for allowing me to be part of this very great initiative and this engagement with colleagues. African Union Sports Council Region 5, for those of you who might not be very familiar, we are responsible or a coordinating body for 10 Southern African countries: Angola, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And our role is to coordinate sport and recreation at all levels. And our vision is that of being Africa's leading sport region through innovation and excellence. And we regard ourselves as a leading home of innovation and excellence. So that speaks to why this campaign is critical for us. And it sits very squarely, not only in our strategic plan, but also in our constitution, where issues of inclusion are embedded very highly in our priorities. This year, we've been running what we've been calling an inclusion revolution, where we've been driving the message of creating a cohesive and inclusive and an accessible society through sport and recreation. As a region, since 1980, we have scored a lot of successes in the Paralympic space as compared to the athletes that have gone to the Olympic Games. And so, but we've realized there's an anomaly in terms of the hype, the visibility, awareness of disability sport, and in particular Paralympic Games and Paralympic athletes. So we found this initiative a great initiative to scale up within the rest of our member countries. Just in terms of some of the statistics, if we look into the London 2012 Paralympic Games, we had 164 nations, and 36 of them were coming from Africa. And Africa is made up of 54 countries. When we went to Rio from Africa, we had 45 countries out of the 54. And in Tokyo, we had 43 countries. So to us, that is not the message we want to see. We want to create more countries to be involved, more athletes from all the African countries, all 54 of them. So in this campaign, we are determined to walk the road towards Los Angeles. 5 areas that we look forward to as we drive this campaign. Number one, we want to see by 2028 Los Angeles, and perhaps even to Brisbane 2032, we want to see an increased participation by our nations to move away from the 40s to the entire continent being involved, particularly in terms of athletes participation and also in terms of broadcasters and nations themselves. When you look into these athletes, these 46 or 45 countries I'm talking about, some countries were sending 2 athletes, others 7. The highest that we had was 57 athletes by Egypt in the 2016 games. And so when you look at the delegations that are going to other games, it's even higher than that. So we want to change that narrative and ensure that we indeed become a truly inclusive society. Number 2, we are looking into increasing the normal distribution curve on the demographics for viewership and followership of sport for persons with disabilities. It is very true that when you look into the demographics, but also just the level of reach in terms of interest and followership on either linear or digital platforms, it's very low as far as viewership of Paralympic Games and disability sports is concerned. So we want to change that narrative as we go towards Los Angeles. Number 3, we are looking into increased investment by key players in sport, both government and sports movement itself, towards preparation and support for para-athletes. The budgets that are set aside for preparations for athletes with disabilities in comparison with the other budgets is very, very low. Not only budget for athletes, but also budgets for broadcasters to access the rights to show and broadcast the Paralympic Games. We just did a survey in our region. So far, if our statistics is right, we are still engaging some of the broadcasters. Only one country has access rights to the Paralympic Games in Paris, and that is not very good reading for us, and we want to see more broadcasters accessing rights come Los Angeles 28. Number 4 for us, we want to see an increase in unified sport in the schools, so that there is more investment towards children with disabilities, and they get more access as well, because we want to increase accessibility even before we go to the Paralympic Games. And lastly for us is on the broadcasting side, where we would love to see an increase in coverage of Paralympic Games and disability sport. We want to see more capacity to manage, even in terms of training of our broadcasters and production teams in our broadcast, our national broadcasters, but also want to see more digital platforms that access and that are also able to show disability sport, and in particular Paralympic Games. So that's basically what we look forward to as Region 5, and that's why this campaign, the Making Noise campaign, becomes critical to our strategic thrust going into 2028 and beyond.
Thank you, Stanley. It's all so exciting, and we're here and looking forward to collaborating to make those 5 points a reality. That's a really great way to conclude these panels. But while you're thinking of your questions, we have a few minutes for questions. I'd like to ask if we can have the video that Sheila and Stanley have been talking about, this digital video campaign. Could we have that shared with everyone on the call, please?
Africa, what goes on beyond this land? Beyond everything you feel? What pictures do you see? What colors do you scream? How wild can it be? How far can it go? Where does it all begin? Is it the soil where our sweat falls? Or is it the sky where our hope flies? Is it in doing and doing and doing until the silence of knowing becomes part of us? Is it in our smiles, the texture of our dreams, or the pain of keeping at it? Is it the dance, the celebration, or the rehearsal of a single moment that takes us beyond our fear? Africa, what goes on beyond this land?
Wow, so I think I'm the only one with the video on, but I imagine that everyone is at home just like clapping and welcoming that initiative. I can start to see all of the messages in the chat. Yeah, this is, a landmark where there's these kinds of stories, narratives, athletes taking center stage, treated with really serious production values, giving them the space, giving them the kind of applause that is deserved, hopefully bringing in whole new audiences to celebrate African para-athletes. So congratulations to the production team for putting that together, and we're really looking forward to seeing what kind of engagement that brings for viewers. Please continue to respond and tell us what you think about that video. We're really pleased to see this local hook in, which is so important, having that localized context to be bringing those stories to life and making it relevant for people all around the world, wherever they're watching, and the athletes that they're supporting. So the Q&A function is where you can ask your questions. We find that the chat sometimes gets a little bit clogged up and hard to follow. There are a couple of questions that I can see. I don't know, Louise, if I should just run through some of the questions and send them out to people. The first
I think that sounds great. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the first question I can see here is from Mark Anthony Bastiani. Question is, how do we get more people with disability involved when cost is a factor, not just for the Paralympic, different sports, but also for day-to-day living? This is a really important question. I'd like to maybe come to Samuel first. And Simon, if you'd like to answer, you're also very welcome to chime in as well. So Samuel, are you able to unmute? How do we get more people with a disability involved when cost is a factor, not just for Paralympic and different sports, but also day-to-day living? Maybe Samuel dropped off. So then Simon, maybe you might be in a position to answer this as well. Yeah.
Hello. I think cost shouldn't be a problem because we are talking about issues of rights. Much as we still know that these kind of rights, they would fall into the social, economic, and cultural rights that are rights of progressive realization. But we really need to make sure that the government comes in to ensure that rights of persons with disabilities in this area are being very much respected. And at the same time, even other stakeholders, including the corporate world, they would be able to come in to support, as it has already been said, that even the corporate world would come in to support, because it's an aspect of sport. It also helps in enhancing their visibility within the sport fraternities. So it is important because it's an aspect of right. At the same time, it's helping in addressing most of the challenges that we've been grappling with, issues of stigma and discrimination, just to make sure that as persons with disabilities, we are also as active in the sporting fraternity. So even on day-to-day life, you know, if you're talking of assistive devices, they would help us become even more productive. At the same time, we are contributing to the national development as well. I hope I've ably tackled it. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah. Samuel, I can see you've joined as well, so you might have some contributions about how we can deal with costs for day-to-day, but also for sport. There's another question that you might also be able to answer, which comes from Claire Childs from Motivation. How can sport as a catalyst, how can sport be a catalyst to enable more people to access their right to day-to-day assistive technology? So yeah, both the cost and also then how can it be a catalyst for accessing day-to-day assistive technology? Thank you, Samuel.
All right, so beginning with costs, it's true that the cost of getting involved in disability sports is higher than in regular sport. However, two things that we need to look at are building partnerships that are not built on pity, but on mutually beneficial relationships. What we're trying to do is, with regards to wheelchair basketball, we've engaged a local engineering company. I heard you mention Claire. I got a wheelchair basketball, a wheelchair for wheelchair basketball from Motivation a couple of years ago. So we took that and we let these people take a look at it to see if we can have this manufactured locally So that should bring down the cost substantially. But at the same time, we really have to change the narrative. Disability sports are not about charity. Disabled people are real people in the communities, and they've got a great deal to contribute. And this is a constituency that the corporate world can tap into. With that in mind, then we should be looking at building those relationships whereby they're getting value for getting involved in the sport. So that in that way, then perhaps we can tackle the cost issue. There is also another element of this in the sense that for Malawi, I know that for this year, in order for the government to be able to finance the trip for the para-athletes, they've coughed up about 70 million. This has never been done before. And it's been done because we have told them that, look, para-athletes achieve a lot more than the regular athletes. Therefore, it's a worthwhile investment. And because of that narrative, they have put in the money. On the stand-off ceremony, we had the CEO of the Malawi National Council of Sports. We had the Minister for Disability Affairs, and we also had the Sports Minister. Already, having people at that level attracts other people from the corporate world and otherwise. So all those things put together and more would help us tackle the cost issue. I don't know if I can remember the second question. I might need reminding.
It was about access to assistive technology. How can sport be a catalyst for access to assistive technology?
Well, in my view, sport can be a catalyst because when we look at people living with disabilities needing these assistive devices in order for them to participate, then we together as a community or as a society would want to make that available for them to enrich their lives and to include everyone. Without the assistive technologies, then we'll go back to the place whereby people with disabilities are not able to participate in sports. So indeed, it can be a catalyst because people are able to see that people with disabilities are able, beyond the amateur sport, but to also be professional, great achievers, and that would allow for us to access assistive technology more and more.
Thank you, Samuel. And I realize we're going over time, everyone, so sorry, and we understand if you need to leave. I'm just going to maybe wrap up or pass to Mufunanji Magalasi, who's got his hand up for maybe some reflections here. I also saw a question, Mufu, if you can be very snappy about it, about how we can engage with people without disabilities to understand, connect, and be more inclusive. So that's a second question, but you, I think, has some reflections on maybe cost, if we can take that very quickly. And then that, I think we need to end there, unfortunately. And I'll tell you about how you can stay up to date.
All right. In terms of the issues of, I wanted to start with the issue of cost. Just to add, I think this has been mentioned by Simon and the previous speaker. When you talk about sports in Malawi, there is already support from government. There's already a budget which the ministries do have for the different issues. So here, it's a question of prioritizing. I don't think that it will be expensive because it is people with disabilities who have to access the sports. It's a question of prioritizing, putting it on the agenda. In terms of on how to connect with people with disability, people to start to engage on issues of disability. For me, it's a dialogue. We need to get into dialogue. We need to use ways which are going to get into dialogue with people. There is a big belief, I think this is another angle, that mainstream media will get the message quickly and out there, but mainstream media does have a disadvantage. The disadvantage it has is that in most cases, it is information dissemination based, while if we are going to look at issues of really connecting and changing people's perceptions, we need to have a dialogue with people. We're using the different mediums. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, we need to leave it there. I could see there were questions from people who wanted to replicate this approach in their own countries, they're in their own context. The good news is the tools are available. So get in touch with us and we'd be happy to share what we've published and what we've made available. People asking about, is this happening in my own country? We can also take that. Can I get involved? We can also follow up on that on a one-to-one basis, I think. I'm very findable. You can find my profile on the university or on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to have conversations with anyone who'd like to. So it leaves me to say thank you to GDI Hub and to 80/20/30 for the invitation for this webinar and for having us, giving us this opportunity to engage with you all today. Thank you so much to all of the panelists, to Samuel, to Mufu, to Simon, to Sheila, to Stanley. You know, the insights you've shared have been really fantastic. And to all of you who are watching, we will try to get the link to the video shared out to everyone so that you can share it in all your networks. Make sure that you're making noise in all of your networks and spreading the word. Engage in the Paralympics, have conversations, use this as the opportunity that it is. And yeah, so thank you very much for joining us today. We hope this might lead to some further discussions about what an opportunity this is and then what we can share, what we've learned from our research through the Parasport Against Stigma project. Thank you all.